Trump's latest tariff gambit against Canada isn't going according to plan, and the economic fallout is starting to hit home. While the president boasts about billions pouring into U.S. coffers, the reality on the ground tells a very different story. America's relationship with its northern neighbor is unraveling in ways that could reshape North American trade for decades. So what exactly went wrong with Trump's tariff strategy, and why is Canada, of all countries, becoming the biggest casualty in this trade war? To understand how we got here, we need to look at the numbers that Trump doesn't want you to see. Despite having only about 11% of the U.S. population, Canada was America's single largest importer of U.S. goods and our second largest foreign investor. This wasn't just trade, it was economic symbiosis that had been built over decades. But Trump's mean-spirited tariffs and rhetoric have gutted that relationship for good. The escalation has been swift and brutal. Trump hit Canadian steel and aluminum with up to 50% tariffs, then slapped Canadian pharmaceuticals and autos with 35% tariffs, depending on where components are made. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, they're already triggering Canadian layoffs, including at General Motors Canada, a subsidiary of American GM. And here's the kicker, they're about to jack up the prices of $3 billion worth of Canadian pharmaceuticals that Americans consume each year. But the most telling moment came on August 7th, when Trump's latest round of tariffs took effect. At 2 minutes before midnight, he posted on social media boasting about billions of dollars in tariffs pouring into the United States. What he conveniently skipped was the part where American companies pay those tariffs, costs that will soon trickle down to consumers in the form of higher prices. The economic data is already painting a grim picture. Historic tariff levels not seen since the 1930s. Great Depression are now reality, with rates ranging from 10 to 50% on various countries. The vast majority of economists and CEOs reject Trump's market mayhem and predict his tariffs will have disastrous consequences on the U.S. economy. In April, dozens of top economists, including 2 Nobel laureates, signed a letter warning that his tariffs have no basis in economic reality and could cause a self-inflicted recession. Meanwhile, hard data mapping the tariff's effects is becoming harder to come by. After Trump fired the Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner for simply doing her job following a disappointing jobs report, there are questions about whether accurate economic data will be released at all. But what we do know is alarming. Contrary to Trump's promise of creating more factory jobs, his tariff threats have coincided with job losses nationwide. Manufacturing employment has hit its lowest rate in 5 years, with 37,000 jobs lost since April alone. For American consumers, the impact is becoming increasingly visible. The Budget Lab at Yale University estimates that Trump's tariffs will cost U.S. households an average of $2,400 in 2025. Clothing prices could rise 38% in the short term and 17% in the long term. Shoe prices face similar increases. These aren't abstract economic concepts. They're real costs that will hit American families in their wallets.
Yeah, well, this is going to hit a lot of products that we Americans love to buy. Computers, electronics, coming in from countries like China, Vietnam, Malaysia being hit with 30, 20, 19% tariffs. Clothing and shoes coming in from China, Vietnam, India, going to be hit with 30, 20%, 25 tariffs. Watches now on the list because of Americans' love for Swiss watches. That's going to be tariffed at 39%. Alcohol coming in from the European Union, countries like France and Italy. That's wine and spirits going to be tariffed at 15%, and toys being tariffed at 30 to 20% coming in from China and Vietnam. There are many, many estimates to suggest what this may cost American families. The most recent estimate that we have is from the Yale Budget Lab just this month, projecting that because of all of these tariffs, if they stay in effect, it's going to cost the average family $2,400 a year. Obviously, that is significant, as Americans we know are worried about these tariffs, worried about their finances, worried about inflation. That is a significant hit to the average American family.
The international response has been swift and coordinated. Both the International Monetary Fund and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development have downgraded their predictions for global economic growth as a direct result of Trump's trade policies. Trump has purposely upended domestic and world trade, and the consequences are rippling across the globe. Economists John Sylvia and Brad Jensen argue that Trump's tariffs will slow the economy, resulting simultaneously in fewer jobs and lower real wages. They predict the economic erosion will be a slow, steady process rather than an immediate collapse. Death by 1,000 cuts rather than a dramatic crash. What's particularly striking is how some U.S. trade partners are shocked at the lack of pushback from Trump's allegedly pro-business Republican Party. But no trading partner has been jilted quite so ignominiously as Canada. The relationship between the two countries, once characterized by cooperation and mutual benefit, has devolved into something resembling economic warfare. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has been forced to navigate this new reality with a combination of diplomacy and defiance. When Trump announced the 35% tariff increase in July, citing fentanyl as justification, Carney's response was measured but firm. Canada has made vital progress to stop the scourge of fentanyl in North America. Behind the diplomatic language, however, Canada has been preparing its own countermeasures.
U.S. is our largest customer. We respect them, but it has to go both ways. You can't have tariffs on one side and not the other. I still stand by what I say. Dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff. They understand strength, not weakness, and we should never, ever roll over and be weak. Okay, so let me be very clear. I'm 100% supportive of the Prime Minister and the federal government. And when you sit around at a family dinner table, you discuss all sorts of ideas, and that's what we're going to do.
The message from Canadian officials has been clear: dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff. While respecting the U.S. as Canada's largest customer, Canadian leaders are emphasizing they will respond with strength rather than weakness and won't roll over in negotiations. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who leads the province's Progressive Conservative Party, has urged forceful pushback rather than rolling over to Trump's demands. Ford has been particularly vocal, stating that Trump has become probably the most disliked politician in the world in Canada for attacking Canada as their closest family member. He's revealed that American governors, senators, and Congress members, including Republicans, privately disagree with Trump's approach but are too scared to come out and say anything for fear of presidential retaliation. This represents a significant shift in Canadian political thinking. Even conservative politicians are now advocating for a harder line against American economic aggression.
He's probably the most disliked politician in the world in Canada because he's attacked his closest family member, and that's the way we look upon it. And when I talk to the governors and senators and Congress people, even Republicans totally disagree, but they're too scared to come out and say anything because the president will go after them, outside of a few senators. And I want to thank them for coming out and standing with not just American people, but their closest friends and allies, which is Canada. And again, we love the Americans. It's unfortunate President Trump decided to go down this road.
The numbers tell the story of a relationship in free fall. U.S. total goods trade with Canada was $761.8 billion in 2024. With a relatively modest U.S. deficit of $62 billion. In the first 5 months of 2025, that deficit actually rose 9.8% year over year to $25.6 billion, suggesting that Trump's tariffs aren't even achieving their stated goal of reducing trade imbalances. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of this trade war isn't economic, it's psychological. Trump's tariffs and rhetoric are triggering what can only be described as a divorce between two nations that have been economic partners for generations. We're seeing bourbon boycotts and a drop in Canadian tourism to the U.S. These cultural and social ties, once taken for granted, are being severed by political decisions made in Washington. The ripple effects extend far beyond trade statistics. Canadian businesses that have invested billions in U.S. operations are now questioning their long-term strategies. American companies that rely on Canadian suppliers are scrambling to find alternatives, often at higher costs. The integrated supply chains that made North American manufacturing competitive are being deliberately dismantled. The pharmaceutical sector provides a particularly stark example of the policy's contradictions. Canada supplies $3 billion worth of pharmaceuticals to the U.S. annually. Trump's tariffs on these life-saving medications will directly increase healthcare costs for Americans, the very people his policies are supposedly designed to help. Meanwhile, the legal challenges to Trump's tariff authority are mounting. Many of these tariffs were imposed using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a 1977 statute that doesn't actually mention tariffs. A trade court ruled in May that Trump overstepped his authority, and the case is now working its way through the appeals process, likely headed for the Supreme Court. What makes this situation particularly tragic is how unnecessary it all seems. Even Republican voices are now speaking out. Representative Don Bacon from Nebraska has stated that the tariffs have poisoned the water in U.S.-Canada relations, explaining that they're hurting American businesses and sees no benefit to either country. He emphasizes that the trade relationship has been equitable and mutually beneficial, exactly what effective trade policy should accomplish.
It's given us not only the money, it's billions, trillions of dollars of money, but it gives us great power over enemies.
But not all Republicans agree, including Representative Don Bacon, who represents a district in Nebraska. He joins us now. You in the past have spoken out against tariffs targeting Canada. You've watched this trade war unfold. From your perspective, how would you describe the Canada-U.S. relationship in this moment?
Unfortunately, it's in a rocky spot, but it shouldn't be. The United States and Canada have been friends for, a century plus. We've had a great undefended border, and we've had a great relationship together. We've had a great trade relationship. And by the way, our trade relationship is quite equitable. Canada may have a little advantage on exports. We have an advantage in services. We also have a great tourism industry. So it's been a win-win relationship between us. And I hate to see this trade.
The broader implications extend well beyond North America. If the U.S. is willing to wage economic warfare against its closest ally and largest trading partner, what message does that send to other countries? The answer is already becoming clear. Nations around the world are looking for alternatives to American partnerships and reducing their dependence on U.S. markets. China's economy, according to recent analysis, is only 0.2% small, hard due to U.S. tariffs, about half the impact on the U.S. itself. Meanwhile, Canada's economy faces a 2.1% contraction in the long run. This suggests that Trump's tariffs are hurting America's friends more than its competitors. The European Union and United Kingdom are actually seeing slight economic benefits from the U.S.-Canada trade war as businesses and investment flows redirect away from North America. Canada itself is diversifying, with a 25% increase in trade with the EU and 30% with the UK. This represents a fundamental shift in global economic power, with America's traditional allies finding opportunities in the chaos created by U.S. trade policy. Perhaps most concerning is the long-term damage to American soft power and credibility. For decades, the U.S. has been seen as a reliable partner that honors its commitments and works within established international frameworks. Trump's arbitrary tariff policies, imposed through questionable legal authorities and changed on a whim, are undermining that reputation. The human cost of this economic warfare is often overlooked in discussions of trade statistics and tariff rates. Canadian workers at GM plants are losing their jobs. American consumers are facing higher prices for essential goods. Small businesses on both sides of the border that have built their operations around cross-border trade are being forced to restructure or close entirely. As we look toward the future, the question isn't just whether these tariffs will be reversed, but whether the damage to U.S.-Canada relations can ever be fully repaired. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. Canadian businesses and politicians who once saw the U.S. as a natural partner are now actively seeking alternatives. The irony is that Trump's tariffs may ultimately achieve the opposite of their intended effect. Rather than making America more competitive and bringing manufacturing jobs back, they're making the U.S. economy less efficient and more isolated. Rather than strengthening America's negotiating position, they're driving allies away and creating new partnerships that exclude the United States. What we're witnessing isn't just a trade dispute, it's the unraveling of the North American economic integration that has been a source of strength and prosperity for both countries. The question now is whether cooler heads will prevail before the damage becomes irreversible, or whether Trump's tariff gambit will permanently reshape the economic landscape of North America. The early signs suggest that America's heartbreaking divorce from Canada may be more costly than anyone initially imagined, and the bill is just starting to come due.